The Christmas tree glowed softly, its lights casting a warm hue. But as I watched my daughter, Emily, tear into my gift, a cherished family heirloom, her smirk chilled me to the core. Still, I stayed silent, even as she labeled my gift Regift-Ready. The warmth of the room felt distant now, the laughter of her friends fading into the background. As I watched her, the bitter truth settled in. My daughter had no respect for me. That's when I made my decision. I paid her mortgage instead. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The tree stood like a sentry in the corner of the living room, lit with gold and red ribbons and that particular kind of old-fashioned warmth only December could manufacture. The scent of cinnamon, pine, and fresh coffee swirled lazily in the air. Outside, the Wisconsin snow had settled into its final hush, blanketing the world like a lie no one dared to touch. Helen had spent hours perfecting this morning. The pecan rolls were warm, the bacon crisp. Todd, her son-in-law, sat cross-legged near the fireplace, cracking jokes with Emily's friends, who had crashed the night before after some rooftop bar thing in Milwaukee. Helen didn't mind the company, not in theory, but something about their laughter carried an edge, the kind that left her skin humming. Sam, her husband of 34 years, handed out mugs of hot cocoa, doing his usual job of looking cheerful enough to keep everything surface level smooth. Always the buffer, always the peacemaker. Emily was on the couch, legs folded underneath her, long sweater slipping off one bare shoulder. Her nails were fresh red, sharp as her smile. Helen knelt near the base of the tree, reached for the small velvet box she'd wrapped herself. Carefully, reverently, she turned and held it out. "Emily," she said, voice warm but fragile. "This is from me, and my mother before me." Emily blinked slowly and took the gift with a practiced smile. "Thanks, Mom," she said, dragging out the "oh" just enough to sound slightly amused. Helen watched, hopeful. Inside that box was her grandmother's brooch, an heirloom of real weight. Gold filigree with inlaid pearls, passed down on Christmas mornings for 3 generations. Helen had worn it to her wedding. She'd imagined, perhaps foolishly, that Emily might wear it to hers. Emily peeled off the ribbon with bored fingers, popped the box open, and froze for half a second. Long enough for Helen to see something pass over her daughter's face. Recognition, maybe even understanding, but it vanished behind the smirk that followed. "Oh," Emily said, lifting the brooch between her fingertips like it was a dead insect. "Vintage." Laughter bubbled up from the other end of the couch. Jen, or maybe it was Laurel, one of Emily's college friends, snorted into her mimosa. Emily held up the brooch toward Todd. "Babe," she said, "this'll go great with that ugly grandma jewelry TikTok you were talking about." Todd chuckled, not cruelly, just lazy. "Regency core realness," he said, sipping his coffee. And then it happened, casually, like it meant nothing. Emily reached for a roll of white stickers from the coffee table. She peeled one off, scribbled something on it with a Sharpie, and slapped it onto the box the brooch had come in. The sticker read, "Regift-Ready." Laughter erupted again. A little too loud, a little too knowing. Helen felt her face grow hot. Not from anger. From something deeper, hollower. The kind of heat that comes when you realize you've been seen naked in the middle of a room and no one looks away. She didn't say anything, didn't move. Just stood there for a moment, blinking against the burn. Sam shifted in his chair, looking away. The room still smelled like cinnamon, but the warmth had drained out of it. Emily finally noticed. "What?" she asked, half laughing. "It's a joke. Chill." Helen reached for her coffee, hand steady. When she spoke, her voice was soft and even. "Thank you, dear," she said. "That label suits the day perfectly." It took Emily a beat too long to catch the tone. By then, Helen was already walking toward the kitchen. She didn't slam the mug into the sink, didn't cry. She rinsed it quietly, like she was scrubbing away a film no one else could see. Something in her shifted then, not loudly, not like a crack, but like a piece of ice beneath a frozen lake giving way silently, changing everything above it. She'd never forgotten her mother's words about the brooch. "You give it only when you're sure the person receiving it won't laugh." Helen had laughed when she first heard that, called it dramatic. Now, standing in her spotless kitchen while the laughter continued in the next room, she understood exactly what her mother meant. And she wouldn't forget. Not this Christmas. Not ever. Helen stood at the kitchen sink, her back to the laughter echoing from the living room. She sipped her coffee slowly, though it had long gone cold. The mug, a chipped piece of ceramic from a Door County craft fair, felt strangely solid in her hand, more solid than she did. The brooch, the laughter, the sticker. She could still see it all like it was frozen in the air around her, refracted in every glittering ornament hanging from the tree. She set the mug down quietly on the counter. Then she reached for her coat. Her real one, not the light one she wore for quick errands. The one with the shearling collar and the pocket she always meant to mend. She pulled it from the hall closet, slipped it on, and tied the belt with slow, steady fingers. No one noticed at first. The sound of a cork popping. Someone cheering. A Bluetooth speaker starting up with that same tired Christmas playlist. A high-pitched laugh from Emily, so similar to Helen's at that age, though Helen had never weaponized hers the way Emily did. As she moved toward the front door, her boots silent on the worn hardwood, Emily glanced up. "Mom," she said, laughing through the word. "Where are you going? Don't be dramatic." Helen paused, her hand on the brass doorknob. The wreath on the front door, the one she'd made from pine cones and burlap ribbon, swayed slightly with the draft. She didn't turn around. "Oh, I wouldn't dream of it," Helen said. "You're doing just fine without me." The door clicked softly behind her as she stepped outside. Snow fell in thin, silver sheets, too soft to sting but cold enough to make her blink against it. Each flake landed gently on her cheeks, melting into the tear tracks she hadn't realized were already there. She didn't wipe them away. Let them fall. Let the cold numb them. She walked slowly to her car, the old Subaru with the passenger side mirror duct-taped from last winter's ice storm. No one followed. No one called out. That silence hit harder than it should have. It was a 22-minute drive back to her place on the other side of town. No Christmas lights there. Helen hadn't bothered decorating the outside this year. She pulled into the driveway, the crunch of tires on snow the only sound in the stillness. Inside, she kicked off her boots, hung the coat, and stood in the center of her living room for a long moment, unsure where to begin. Then she walked to the hallway, opened the door to the office she hadn't touched in months. The smell hit her first. Paper, dust, something faintly like cedar. Everything exactly as her late husband had left it before the cancer took him 2 winters ago. A coffee cup still on the shelf, a ledger left open under a paperweight shaped like a ship's anchor. He always liked metaphors. She knelt beside the old file cabinet. The key was still taped to the underside of the bottom drawer, right where he'd told her he kept it just in case. She unlocked it. Folders slid against each other with a hiss. Rows of labels: mortgage, trust, pension, deeds, stock options. She ran her fingers along them like a pianist warming up before a performance. Her hand stopped on one folder. Emily. She pulled it out. Opened it. Inside, college tuition checks. A prom photo. A copy of the first lease she and Todd had signed. Receipts for a down payment on their first condo. quietly covered by Helen and Sam, things Emily either never knew or had chosen to forget. The phone rang. Helen reached for it without looking. "Hey, Margie," she said softly, voice hoarse. Margie didn't need pleasantries. "She embarrassed you again?" Helen exhaled slowly. "Yes." A pause. Then, "But I'm not the one who'll be embarrassed next." She didn't say it with venom. She didn't need to. It was just a fact. The next morning, sunlight broke across Helen's driveway like a guilty secret. Bright, blinding, too clean for what she felt. Her coffee sat untouched on the counter, gone cold hours ago. The house was quiet except for the old clock in the hallway, its steady tick filling the space like breath. Helen dressed with precision. Gray slacks, navy sweater, boots polished to a soft sheen. She hadn't worn makeup since Sam's funeral. But today she brushed on a thin layer of mascara. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. By the time she parked outside Foster and Lange Law, the sun had risen high enough to glare off the snow, turning everything blinding white. The office sat in a narrow brick building downtown, squeezed between a shuttered antique shop and a coffee house still advertising pumpkin lattes in January. She hadn't been here in years, not since Sam's will was settled. Inside, it smelled of paper and lemon oil. The receptionist, a young man with a perfectly trimmed beard and a polite smile, looked up from his computer. "Mrs. Walker, Mr. Foster's expecting you." Dean Foster rose from behind his desk as she entered, tall and broad-shouldered, hair now more silver than black. His tie was slightly crooked, same as always. The man had been her husband's lawyer, confidant, and drinking buddy back when they still believed retirement would come easy. "Helen," he said warmly, shaking her hand. "You look determined." "Something like that," she said. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Still managing the trust fund, I hope? I was afraid you might have handed it off." Helen sat, setting her gloves neatly on the table. "I still manage it. Sam wanted it for family emergencies." She looked him straight in the eye. "I'm redefining what that means." Dean leaned back, a small grin tugging at his mouth. "You always were the smartest, Walker." She didn't smile back. "Flattery won't soften what I'm here to ask." He folded his hands. "Try me." Helen slid a paper across the desk, one of the statements she'd pulled from the file cabinet last night. "I need everything tied to this account reviewed. Withdrawals, collateral liens, especially anything that mentions Emily or Todd Reynolds." Dean's brow furrowed slightly. "You think they've touched it?" "I don't think," she said. "I know how Todd works. He doesn't ask. He convinces." Dean opened his laptop, typing with quick, practiced precision. A few clicks later, he frowned. "Well, now, that's interesting." Helen watched him turn the screen toward her. On it were two entries: a joint signature loan, then a second mortgage against Emily and Todd's home taken 6 months ago. Amount $240,000. Reason: exterior and aesthetic improvements. "Cosmetic renovations," Dean said, reading her expression. "New deck, marble countertops, imported tile, that kind of thing." Helen's lips parted in disbelief. "They used equity for vanity?" Dean nodded. "Vanity built on debt, I'm afraid." Helen's laugh was quiet, disbelieving, sharp around the edges. "How poetic." Dean sat back. "They'll feel it soon enough. Rates are climbing. You could let the market teach them a lesson." Helen turned her gaze toward the frosted window. Snow was falling again, slow, deliberate flakes twisting in the wind. "No," she said finally. "I don't want them to sweat." Dean raised a brow. "No? I want them to shiver." For a long moment, silence filled the office. The only sound was the hum of the radiator and the faint creak of old wood settling. Dean studied her face, then chuckled softly, not mocking, but impressed. Sam always said you had steel under that Sunday school smile. Helen reached for her gloves. He wasn't wrong. As she stood, Dean hesitated. If I'm going to help you, Helen, I need to know what you're planning. She slipped her gloves back on, button by button. You'll know soon enough. For now, I just need the numbers, everything they owe, and to whom. Dean leaned forward, tone lowering. You're not just chasing pride here, are you? No, she said simply. I'm chasing balance. Her reflection stared back at her from the window. Small, precise, deliberate. For the first time in months, she looked alive. She turned back to him. Send me the documents by the end of the week. I'll have them couriered, Dean said, still studying her like a puzzle. You sure you're ready for this? Helen's eyes flickered with something cold and clean. I was ready the moment she laughed. She left without looking back. Outside, the air bit at her cheeks, but she welcomed it. The courthouse clock chimed noon, echoing down the street. She slipped her keys into her pocket and began walking, not toward her car, but down the block, toward the bank where her husband's trust was held. The bank lobby was warm in that sterile, clinical way, forced heat and plastic poinsettias doing their best to simulate holiday cheer. Helen stepped through the glass doors and walked past the receptionist without a glance. Her breath still lingered in the cold behind her, but inside, she was already composed. The woman behind the counter didn't know her, and Helen preferred it that way. I'd like to make a mortgage payment, she said, sliding a slip of paper across the counter. Emily and Todd's address was neatly typed, free of smudges or errors. The teller blinked. You're not on the account. Helen smiled faintly, the kind of smile that asked no permission. It's a gift. One time. I'm aware I won't receive account holder privileges. The teller hesitated, then typed. The system accepted the payment, just enough to trigger a processing audit. Just enough to signal a transfer. Just enough to let her slip through a back door. She thanked the woman, stepped out into the cold, and pulled out her phone. Dean, she said as soon as he picked up. They'll flag the transaction by tomorrow. That's your window. Dean didn't ask questions. He never did. Understood. By the time Helen arrived home, the sun was low and blinding in the windshield, the kind of winter glare that stripped everything of detail. She pulled into the garage and stepped into the house like it was a different battlefield. In the kitchen, Margie sat at the counter nursing a cup of tea, flipping through a catalog with more sarcasm than interest. Jesus. This one says it's a mindfulness spatula, Margie muttered. What does it do? Meditate while it flips your eggs? Helen set down her bag and peeled off her gloves. I'm buying part of Emily's mortgage. Margie froze mid-page. I'm sorry? Helen turned to face her fully. They've missed 2 payments. Overdrawn on their HELOC. It's all layered through an investment trust, so the debt's been bundled and sold. Legally, I can start buying shares of the paper that holds their house. Margie lowered the catalog like it had gone radioactive. You're serious about this? Helen poured herself a cup of tea. Deadly. Margie's voice was quiet now. What does it do exactly? It gives me leverage, Helen said, stirring her tea slowly. The kind you don't see until it's under you. If I own part of their obligation, they can't make a move without touching me. Margie let out a low whistle. That's not revenge, Helen. That's chess. Helen didn't reply. She reached into the drawer, pulled out a manila envelope, and slipped inside the first set of documents Dean had couriered over that morning. Her handwriting was sharp and deliberate as she labeled it. Phase 1, Debt Acquisition. The phrase looked so cold on the paper. So clean. Margie looked at her. You really think they won't find out it's you? Helen sipped her tea. Eventually, maybe, but not before I own enough of their life to make them feel it. She walked to the window, watching the pale blue twilight fall across the snow-covered street. It looked peaceful out there, silent, still. But inside, numbers shifted. Balances moved. Titles changed hands. They labeled me Regift-Ready, she said. Let's see how they like being payment-ready. Margie gave a low chuckle, half impressed, half afraid. You're colder than the damn driveway. Helen turned slightly. I'm precise. There's a difference. Later that night, after Margie had gone home, Helen sat alone at the kitchen table. Her laptop screen glowed softly, illuminating spreadsheets and debt portfolios. She clicked through lenders like a surgeon navigating arteries. Each click was a choice, each choice a stitch in something larger. By 11:37 p.m., she'd secured 3 micro-shares in a bundled trust that owned the lien on Emily and Todd's home. Small steps, but the kind that accumulated. The kind that, by design, couldn't be undone. The bank office smelled like printer ink, floor wax, and tension. Emily crossed her legs sharply, her black boots tapping against the marble tile as she glared across the desk at the loan officer. Todd sat beside her, shifting in his seat every few seconds, too jittery for someone who used to mock Helen's anxious energy. Okay, the officer said slowly, sliding a printed document forward. So here's the issue. Emily leaned in. We applied to refinance. We have equity. We have history with this bank. I don't understand the delay. The officer adjusted his glasses, trying to sound neutral. Your property lien is partially owned through a bundled trust. Normally that's fine. But one of the controlling microlenders has placed a restriction on the note. It triggered a freeze. Emily blinked. A what? A freeze on transfer rights, he repeated, pointing to the line on the form. It prevents refinancing, sales, or movement of collateral until the controlling party is contacted. Standard clause. Todd frowned, his fingers tightening around the armrest. Who the hell is this lender? The officer scrolled through a screen, then glanced at them. Mrs. Helen Walker. Silence. Todd sat back hard like the wind had been knocked out of him. That's your mother. Emily's jaw twitched. I know who it is. She snatched the paper from the desk, scanning it. Her name, Todd's. And then, in legal precision near the bottom, controlling line holder, Helen M. Walker. That has to be a mistake, Emily snapped. She's not a lender, she's a retired music teacher. The officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, she owns a share of the trust, and that share gives her power to restrict asset movements under certain conditions. What conditions? Todd asked, voice rising. Default risk, irregular payments, intent to restructure without full disclosure. The man replied coolly. It's rare, but legal. We have to honor it. Emily stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. We're done here. Outside, the January air bit at her cheeks, but she didn't notice. Her phone was already in her hand. She didn't even wait until they got to the car. She hit H in her contacts and jabbed the screen. Helen picked up on the third ring. Emily, she said, voice calm. Too calm. What the hell did you do? Emily barked. You froze our refi. Do you even understand how insane that is? There was a pause, long enough to twist the silence into something sharp. Then Helen said, You're right. I can't do that. Emily opened her mouth, but Helen's voice cut clean through. I already did. Todd looked over from the driver's seat, eyes wide. Why? Emily shouted. Is this about Christmas? Because if this is some guilt trip, no, Helen said. It's a consequence. You can't interfere with our lives like this. That's... Helen interrupted again, voice silk over steel. Emily, you use the equity in your house to fund tile and patio furniture. That's not my interference. That's your irresponsibility. You've gone completely off the rails, Emily hissed. Helen exhaled through her nose, steady. Then maybe you'll need to learn how to walk without tracks laid out for you. Silence on both ends. Then Helen added, Merry Christmas, dear. and hung up. Emily stared at her phone like it had slapped her. Her fingers clenched so tightly around the case it groaned. She's playing games. Todd pulled out of the parking spot, knuckles white against the wheel. No, she's playing goddamn chess. Emily didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the window, but she wasn't seeing the snow-covered street. She was seeing her mother's face. That calm, quiet face. That fake, gracious tone Helen used to soften every insult and wrap it in a bow. But this wasn't passive-aggressive. This was war. The wine bar off Jefferson had reclaimed barnwood tables, exposed brick, and the kind of lighting that made people feel more attractive than they were. Emily sat dead center with a glass of Sauvignon Blanc she hadn't touched, and a circle of friends who pretended to sip theirs, too. "She's obsessed," Emily said, voice low but loaded. "I swear, she's going senile and vindictive at the same time." Jen blinked. "Wait. Your mom owns your mortgage now?" "She doesn't own it. She infiltrated it," Emily snapped. "She found some technical backdoor into the trust and wedged herself into our financials like she's freaking Gordon Gekko." Laurel gave a tight-lipped smile. "But she's your mom. Why would she do that?" "Because she's petty. Because I didn't fall to my knees over some musty brooch on Christmas morning. Because she's always needed to feel superior. This is just a new weapon." Laughter circled, but it wasn't the good kind. It was thin, uncertain, performed. Half of them were pulling at their napkins, and the other half avoided eye contact. Emily leaned in. "She's unstable. You guys don't see it because she smiles and brings casseroles and never raises her voice. But trust me, she's calculated. She's been keeping receipts for years." Jen cleared her throat. "Well, what are you going to do about it?" Emily raised her glass like a toast and drained it in one pull. "Make sure everyone sees what kind of person she really is." 2 days later, her plan backfired. It started with a trickle, a comment under a post, a forwarded email. Then a statement from Dean Foster's office landed on a neighborhood Facebook group via a retired paralegal who apparently had nothing better to do. It was simple, direct, and legally airtight. Per Wisconsin State Property Code, Helen M. Walker's partial lien acquisition was conducted through a registered trust instrument. Her authority to freeze refinancing was within statutory rights under default risk clauses. No evidence of impropriety has been found. The comments exploded. "Well, that sounds legal as hell. Kinda brilliant. Honestly. Wait, isn't that the daughter who mocked a family heirloom last month?" Someone posted the original Christmas Day photo, Emily holding the velvet box with the sticker, "Regift-Ready." The caption, "Karma wears pearls." Emily stared at the screen, pulse thudding. She slammed her laptop shut, then reopened it 30 seconds later. The local paper made it worse. "Vintage Walker Family Piece to Aid Homeless Fund," read the headline in the Lakewood Ledger. Below it, a photo of the brooch. Below that, the quote, "In honor of compassion and with hope for dignity, I'm donating this in my daughter's name. H. Walker." Beneath the article, comments bloomed like mold. Didn't her daughter mock that on Christmas? Maybe mom should run for mayor. That's some tactical philanthropy right there. In her living room, Helen sat calmly as Margie read the article out loud between cackles. She donated the brooch in Emily's name. "God, you're colder than dry champagne," Margie said. "They laughed at you in front of tinsel. Now they're the holiday joke." Helen folded a blanket across her lap. "Let them talk." Margie grinned. "You've got everyone talking." "I said let them talk," Helen repeated. Silence multiplies fear. But whispers? They metastasize. Margie's face sobered. "You always plan to go public?" "No," Helen said, sipping her tea. "I plan to stay quiet. They handed me the spotlight." Outside, the snow had finally stopped. The street was still and glassy. the kind of winter night where the cold looked like crystal and everything sharp cut clean. The envelope came on a Monday. Plain, white, official. No frills. No warnings on the outside, just wait. Emily found it half buried in the day's pile of Pottery Barn catalogs and credit card offers. She sliced it open with the edge of her nail as she walked into the kitchen. Todd was half watching ESPN at the island, a bowl of cereal going soggy in front of him. She unfolded the letter, read it, and froze. "Default notice," she said, barely above a whisper. Todd looked up, confused. "What?" She handed it over, arms stiff. "The mortgage company. They're calling us delinquent. We're flagged for payment risk." He scanned the page, his face draining of color. This doesn't make sense. We've never missed a full payment. Just one late fee and... Two, Emily cut in. We were late twice, and the remodel expenses got rolled in. The monthly minimum jumped. Todd blinked slowly, doing math in the air. Shit. The silence tightened. Then Todd looked up at her. "Your mom's holding all the cards." Emily slammed a drawer shut, making the utensils rattle. "She's old, Todd. She can't even manage her own mail without calling customer service. She's bluffing." Todd didn't look convinced. "She's bluffing with your life, then, because if she exercises her controlling share and accelerates the note—" "She won't," Emily snapped. "She's still my mother. This is a warning shot. She wants an apology and a sob story so she can go back to playing matriarch of the year." But the words felt hollow even as they left her mouth, because Helen hadn't blinked when she shut down their refinance, hadn't blinked when she weaponized a Christmas gift and walked out without looking back. And now, Helen wasn't speaking. That was what scared Emily most. Across town, Helen sat in a conference room lined with frosted glass and gold-lettered signage that whispered wealth, not flaunted it. Dean placed a thick folder in front of her, clipped and labeled with surgical precision. "This is the full transfer," he said. "Once you sign, your trust will be the sole holder of the mortgage note. They'll be making payments to you. Or not at all." Helen didn't reach for the pen immediately. She glanced at the folder, then leaned back in the chair. "No press," she said. "No noise. Of course. I want this to feel invisible, until it's irreversible." Dean's mouth twitched into a tight smile. "You're surgical, Helen. You know that?" She finally picked up the pen. The click of it echoed like punctuation. With 3 steady strokes, she signed. Dean closed the folder. "Congratulations. You own their debt." Helen corrected him without emotion. "Not yet, but I own their next move." That night, Helen sat in her dining room, the same table that once held birthday cakes and PTA agendas. Now it was covered in legal pads, case folders, and a laptop open to escrow schedules. Margie poured 2 glasses of wine and slid one across. "You don't drink," she said, "but you'll want to sip this." Helen raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Victory in a bottle." Helen smirked, setting the glass aside untouched. "Not yet." Margie leaned forward. "So what's next?" Helen clicked open a file on her screen. Reynolds, so HOO, lionlanguage.pdf. "I'm going to leverage their HOA violation," she said. "Todd poured concrete for the patio without proper approval. It's buried in the bylaws. A technicality." Margie whistled. "That's petty." Helen smiled faintly. "No, it's legal." She minimized the document and opened another, a local grant application for community beautification tied to property compliance. She'd already begun drafting a letter, on behalf of the HOA. "Their next move has to be clean," Helen said. "Any financial hiccup, any zoning dispute, any noise complaint. And the terms of the loan allow me to call in full payment within 30 days. Margie looked over the rim of her wine glass. "And if they can't?" Helen stared out the window. "Then the house goes up for sale." The house on Briar Ridge Lane looked dressed for comfort, not company. Outside, melting snow puddled around the base of the mailbox. Inside, the New Year's brunch buzzed with forced laughter, champagne flutes, and the faint clink of silver against bone china. Todd had outdone himself with a smoked salmon spread. Emily, of course, was in heels and a belted sweater dress like the cover of a suburban lifestyle blog. Then the front door opened. The room tilted. Helen stepped over the threshold, removing her coat without waiting for anyone to take it. The laughter paused. Not died. Paused. Like it had slipped on ice. Emily stood near the kitchen island, her mimosa glass raised halfway. She blinked twice. "Oh," she said, smiling thinly. "We didn't expect you." Helen returned the smile with none of the sugar. "I know," she said. "You rarely expect consequences." Todd appeared at Emily's side like a shadow trying to outrun the sun. "Helen," he said, voice easy, careful. "Let's not make a scene, okay?" Helen's eyes flicked to him, cool and dry. "I wouldn't dream of it," she said. "I prefer paperwork to scenes." She turned, walked past the buffet table and laid a thick manila envelope on the marble countertop. Her fingers lingered on it only long enough to draw eyes. Emily's laugh came too loud, too forced. "What is this? Your attempt at drama?" Helen didn't answer. She turned, smoothed her coat lapel, and walked back out the front door. Not a word more. Not a wasted glance. The envelope sat there like a bomb. Nobody moved. Finally, Todd reached for it, peeled it open, and scanned the top sheet. His lips parted. His throat clicked as he swallowed. Emily rolled her eyes. "What now?" He didn't answer. She grabbed the papers from his hand and read. Just the first few lines. "Notice of foreclosure initiation, 1147 Briar Ridge Lane. Issued by H. K. Walker Trust Holdings. Effective date, January 10th. Due in full, 30 days from date of issuance." Her mouth dropped open. "No," she whispered. "No, this is a scare tactic. This isn't real. It can't be real." Todd didn't move. His silence said more than anything. Emily's voice rose. "She's not allowed to do this. She's my mother." Todd finally looked up at her. "She owns the mortgage." Emily shook her head. "There's got to be some clause, some loophole. We can call the bank. We can—" Todd pointed at the header again. "There's no bank anymore, Em. Your mom is the bank." The mimosa glass in her hand slipped. It didn't shatter. It just bounced against the tile and rolled under the table, trailing citrus and foam across the grout like a stain that wouldn't lift. Emily stood motionless, shaking. The brunch had gone silent. Guests exchanged glances. A couple near the door made awkward excuses and slipped out. Someone else poured more champagne and pretended not to notice. Todd folded the notice carefully, like if he creased it just right, it wouldn't count. Emily leaned on the counter, both palms flat, her face colorless. "She's bluffing. She won't actually go through with this." Todd's reply was almost too soft to hear. "She left the Christmas table without blinking." "What makes you think she'll blink now?" Across town, Helen sat in her garden-facing sunroom, the afternoon light hitting her hands like a spotlight. The tea beside her had gone cold, but she didn't move. She watched a squirrel dart along the fence line, listened to the wind shift the bare branches. Calm. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dean. Delivery confirmed. No incident. No response needed. Helen turned the phone face down and returned to her silence. By the time Helen heard the car in her driveway, the tea on the table had gone cold again. She didn't bother to move it. Through the frost-framed window she saw the headlights slice across the snow and vanish as the engine cut. A door slammed, then another. Footsteps, fast and uneven, crunching through the ice. Helen stood before the knock came. The first hit rattled the glass. The second was louder. By the third, she opened the door. Emily stood there, hair wild, cheeks flushed red from cold and fury. Todd hovered behind her, silent, eyes hollow. "You're destroying us!" Emily shouted, the words coming out in vapor, her breath a mix of anger and panic. Helen didn't flinch. "No, dear," she said evenly. "You mortgaged yourself." Emily's mouth trembled open like she didn't know what to say first. The fury broke loose before she could decide. "You think this is justice? You think humiliating your own daughter in front of the entire town is going to make you feel better about being lonely?" Helen's gaze didn't waver. "Don't confuse loneliness with clarity." Todd stepped forward slightly, hands shoved in his coat pockets. "Helen, we're asking you to stop, please." Helen turned her eyes to him, calm, deliberate, weighing. "You had your chance to stop when you signed your name on that second mortgage." Emily's voice cracked. "We just wanted to build something nice. Everyone does. You act like it's a crime to want a decent home." Helen's tone hardened. "It's not the home, Emily. It's the pretending. The constant dressing up of debt as dignity." Her daughter's face twisted, wounded pride cutting deeper than fear. "You've always hated how I live, how I spend. You're punishing me for being different." Helen stepped closer, quiet enough that Todd had to strain to hear. "When you mocked my gift, you revealed what you value. I'm simply returning it." The words landed like a slap. Emily's voice broke. "You're cruel." Helen shook her head. "You taught me how." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Todd looked away first. He muttered something that might have been her name, but it came out small, shapeless. Then he turned and walked back toward the car. Emily lingered another beat, tears cutting lines through her makeup. "You've won," she said bitterly. "But don't pretend it's noble." Helen's reply was so soft it barely reached her daughter over the wind. "It's necessary." Emily's shoulders jerked, some mix of anger and disbelief, and she stormed down the porch steps, her boots crunching away into the night. The front door clicked shut behind her. Helen exhaled and leaned her forehead against the cool wood. For the first time since this began, her body felt heavier than her mind. She walked back to the living room, her heartbeat echoing faintly in the quiet. The house felt cavernous. The old clock ticked like judgment. Through the window, she watched the car back down the driveway, headlights vanishing into the dark. She stood there long after the light was gone, until the reflection staring back at her in the glass no longer looked entirely like herself. A soft voice broke the silence behind her. "Don't you dare feel bad." Helen turned. Margie stood in the doorway, arms crossed, coat still dusted with snow. She must have come in through the side door, silent as guilt itself. Helen blinked. "How long were you standing there?" "Long enough," Margie said. She walked closer, her tone half command, half comfort. "They laughed at you when you gave them something precious. They called it garbage. You didn't destroy them, Helen. They destroyed their own damn peace." Helen said nothing. Her fingers traced the edge of her teacup, still cold. Margie lowered her voice. "They taught you cruelty. You're teaching accountability. Don't mix the two up." Helen sank slowly into the chair. Her pulse was steady again, but her eyes were distant, fixed on nothing and everything. "Maybe," she said finally, "accountability's just cruelty with paperwork." Margie tilted her head. "And maybe that's exactly what they need." Outside, wind scraped against the windows. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, muffled by distance and snow. Helen stared into the dark. The part of her that once softened was quiet now, dormant, not dead, just resting. The knock at the door this time was gentle. Helen didn't answer right away. She stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a warm mug she didn't intend to drink. The light outside was gray and flat, the kind of overcast that felt like a held breath. The knock came again. 2 polite taps. Patient. She opened the door to find Sam standing there, coat zipped, his hands buried in the pockets. His face was older than she remembered, and for the first time, she saw it without distraction. The lines around his mouth. The way his shoulders curled slightly forward like he'd carried things too quietly for too long. "Hi, Mom," he said. Helen stepped aside, letting him in without a word. The door clicked softly behind him. They sat in the living room, on opposite ends of the couch. The silence between them wasn't hostile. It was heavy, worn in, like a path too often walked. Sam rubbed his palms together. "I talked to Emily." Helen raised an eyebrow. "Is that supposed to mean something to me?" "She's scared," he said, meeting her eyes. "Good," Helen replied. "Fear is memory in disguise." Sam flinched a little but didn't argue. "She said you served her foreclosure papers, at brunch." "I handed her the truth," Helen said. "The timing was a courtesy." Sam exhaled slowly. "Mom, this is a lot." Helen's expression didn't soften. So was the silence while they buried me in condescension. She did mean it, Helen snapped. Every sticker, every eye roll, every public joke at my expense. She meant every inch of disrespect. And now she's learning it has weight. Sam fell quiet for a long moment, then, "You don't want revenge forever." Helen's eyes narrowed. "No," she said, "I want respect. Permanently." The words hung in the room like smoke. "I don't think they know how to give it to you," Sam said gently. "Then they'll be forced to remember me without it," she replied. Sam rubbed the back of his neck. "I know you've been alone since Dad passed. I know you've been hurting." Helen tilted her head, as if bracing for something. "And I saw it," Sam said quietly. "The way you kept the house clean like he might walk back in. The way you kept making 2 cups of coffee every morning. I saw it. I just didn't say anything." Helen's throat worked, but no words came. "I'd come over," Sam continued. "Fix the thermostat, clean the gutters, shovel the driveway. Not because you asked, because I didn't want you to ask. Because I knew if you did, it meant the cracks were showing." Helen looked at him now. Really looked. "You were the adult when no one noticed," she said. He nodded, a little embarrassed. "I didn't mind." She stood, walked to the desk in the corner and pulled open a drawer. From inside she took out a sealed envelope, heavy paper, wax stamped. She handed it to him without explanation. Sam turned it over, confused. "What is this?" Helen returned to her seat. "You'll understand it eventually." He stared at her. "Is this?" "I'm rewriting everything," she said simply. "Not just the mortgage, not just the trust." His brow furrowed. "Mom." She cut him off gently. "The inheritance is changing, because legacy should go to people who understand cost, not just bloodline." He sat very still, the envelope still unopened in his lap. "You always noticed," Helen said, voice quiet now. "So now you'll carry." Outside, the wind had picked up again, scratching faintly at the windows. Sam looked up at her, still processing. "What happens next?" Helen didn't blink. "That depends on how much further they want to test me." The Mothers and Daughters Charity Gala took place in the town's oldest event hall, an ornate red brick relic with crown molding, chandelier lighting, and just enough dust in the corners to remind everyone that legacy had roots. Emily stood near the donor board, sipping club soda and pretending it was champagne. Her smile was fixed, the kind worn like a bandage over a bruise. She laughed at the right moments, leaned in when people spoke, kept her posture camera ready. The past few weeks had been brutal. Articles, gossip threads, that humiliating brunch. This event was her bid at image rehab. She'd coordinated outfits with her mother-in-law, shared a makeup artist with the mayor's wife, even pre-cleared her name for the MC's special thanks segment. She was ready, until Helen walked in. Not rushed, not grand, just present, like the room had always belonged to her and was simply waiting for her arrival. Emily saw her at once, Helen in charcoal silk, gloves off, a small black clutch in her hand. No entourage, no nervous energy, just presence. Emily's breath hitched for half a second before she smoothed it out. She wasn't on the list, she muttered to no one in particular. Margie stood not far behind Helen, hair slicked back, a sequined shawl tossed over one shoulder like she'd won it in a poker game. Her eyes scanned the room with the satisfaction of someone who'd just walked into the final scene of a well-plotted play. "Emily," the mayor called from the stage, "would you join us for a moment?" She blinked, forced another smile, and walked up, heels clicking like they might crack open the floor. "Tonight," the mayor continued, "we celebrate mothers and daughters across Lakewood who've shown generosity in both spirit and action. But one family in particular has made a gift so impactful. It deserves a spotlight." Emily lifted her chin half an inch higher. The mayor turned to the audience. "With deep appreciation, we are proud to announce the Walker Literacy Program, a new scholarship and resource fund for underserved public schools, sponsored by Mrs. Helen Walker." He paused for dramatic effect. "And family." The crowd clapped, then gasped, because behind the podium, a projector screen lit up with a slide, a check, 5 figures. Donation credited to Helen M. Walker in honor of Emily R. Reynolds. Emily's heart stopped. Gasps rippled like applause with broken etiquette. Phones lifted, flashbulbs fired, the cameras turned toward her, and she, boxed in by optics and pressure and years of curated performance, smiled. Wide, frozen, the kind of smile reserved for funerals and corporate mergers. Beside her, the mayor said, "What a beautiful gesture between generations." Emily's voice came out through gritted teeth. "Thank you. It means the world." Click. Flash. Applause. Back in the crowd, Margie leaned toward Helen, her voice low and razor-edged. "You just gift-wrapped revenge in philanthropy." Helen sipped her wine without flinching. "It's Christmas all over again." Margie exhaled a single, stunned laugh. "I don't know whether to hug you or hide behind you." "Neither," Helen said. "Just enjoy the show. Curtain hasn't dropped yet." Up front, Emily stepped down from the stage, face porcelain smooth, hands clenched into the sides of her dress. She didn't look toward Helen. Couldn't, because looking would mean acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would mean surrender. Snow was falling again, soft, slow, almost apologetic, the kind that didn't stick, just whispered across rooftops before disappearing. Helen watched it through the kitchen window, her tea untouched, her reflection faint in the glass. When the knock came, she didn't move at first. It wasn't loud, not frantic, just hesitant. Familiar. She opened the door to find Emily standing there. No makeup, no posture, no armor. Her eyes were swollen, not from anger this time, but from something deeper, something that had been waiting too long to surface. "I shouldn't have come," Emily said, voice catching. "But I didn't know where else to go." Helen stepped aside wordlessly. Emily hesitated, then crossed the threshold, like the air itself might revoke permission if she didn't move fast enough. She stood just inside, arms wrapped around herself. The silence stretched, brittle, but not cruel. Finally, Helen spoke. "You look tired." Emily gave a wet, shaky laugh. "I'm exhausted. From pretending. From fighting." She wiped at her eyes, failing. "I was cruel, Mom. I thought mocking you made me strong." Helen's gaze held steady. "It made you small." Emily's lips quivered. "You're right." Helen didn't smile. I usually am, it's just, people only listen once it hurts. For a moment, neither said anything. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the wind pressing softly against the glass. Emily swallowed. You win. Helen's brow furrowed. I never competed. Emily's eyes flashed, not with defiance, but with disbelief. Of course you did. You beat me in front of everyone. You turned my own friends into witnesses. Helen shook her head. No. You did that when you turned generosity into a punchline. Emily looked down. I didn't understand how much that brooch meant. It wasn't the brooch, Helen said quietly. It was the history. You threw away everything that came before you because it wasn't polished enough for your table. Emily's tears fell freely now, steady as the snow outside. I wanted to be different. You succeeded, Helen said, soft but cutting. You became unrecognizable. That landed. Emily's breath hitched, the kind that hurts the ribs. I lost control, Emily said. And I hurt you. Helen exhaled. And I hurt you back. They stood in that small truth for a long moment. No masks, no performance. Just the faint smell of mint tea and old grief. Emily finally whispered, I hate what we've turned into. Helen looked out the window again, eyes tracing the snowfall. You turned us into this, Emily. I just refused to stay buried in it. Emily's voice was barely audible. You'll never forgive me, will you? Helen turned toward her fully now, her face unreadable. Forgiveness is easy, she said. Trust isn't. Emily nodded slowly, the kind of movement that meant she understood more than she wanted to admit. Helen stepped closer, close enough to touch her daughter's sleeve, but she didn't. I'll always love you, she said quietly. I just stopped financing the disrespect. Emily's breath broke. For a second she looked like she might collapse, but she steadied herself with a shaky inhale. I don't want the money, she said, or the house, or the trust. I don't know how to fix what's left. Helen's voice softened, almost a whisper. You start by meaning it. Emily nodded once, small, desperate, and turned toward the door. Her hand lingered on the knob. I'm sorry, she said without looking back. For Christmas. For everything. Helen didn't answer right away. Then make sure it's the last apology that's required. Emily opened the door, stepping out into the cold. Her figure blurred in the wind and the half-light until she disappeared down the walkway. Helen stood in the doorway long after she was gone. Then she closed it gently, locked it, and pressed her palm against the wood. An old, instinctive gesture, part goodbye, part prayer. Behind her, the clock in the hallway chimed 7. She turned back toward the table, eyes falling on the envelope she'd left there the night before. Addressed, sealed, but unsent. It was labeled, To Emily. For when you're ready. She stared at it, her hand hovering above it, trembling just slightly. Then she pulled it back. Not yet. Dean Foster's office smelled like fresh paper, legal ink, and polished wood, clean and final, like things that couldn't be undone. The fireplace along the back wall clicked softly as it cycled, casting flickers of gold across the trim. Outside, the town braced for another cold front, but in here, things were warm, precise. Helen sat at the end of the long table, her fingers laced neatly in front of her. A fountain pen laid just to the right of her reading glasses. Dean slid the final document forward. Last revision, he said, tapping the page with one blunt finger. This version reflects all your requested changes. Helen adjusted her glasses. And the clause? On page 6, paragraph 4. She flipped to it. Read silently. Her lips curled slightly at the phrasing, her own. She'd dictated it over the phone 2 nights ago, word for word. Dean grinned across the table as she read. You know, I've drafted all kinds of estate provisions over the years. But this one, This one's a first. Helen didn't look up. It's a contract, not a curse. He chuckled. Still, you've essentially written character development into a legal document. Helen turned the page. Growth should come with structure. And time. He leaned back in his chair. Let's go over it one last time, for clarity. Helen nodded. Dean opened the duplicate copy, scanning aloud. Samuel Walker to inherit 70% of estate assets, including the Roths, the investment portfolios, and the primary residence. Helen cut in. He deserves it. Dean nodded. Of course. The remaining 15% to be donated, as per your instructions, to the Walker Literacy Fund. He paused. And the last 15%? Helen's voice didn't waver. Held in escrow, earmarked for Emily R. Reynolds, with conditions. Dean read, the mortgage on 1147 Briar Ridge Lane shall be forgiven in full upon proof of 10 consecutive years of humility and service to others, verified annually through qualifying volunteer work, community contribution, or peer acknowledgement. He laughed again, genuinely impressed. Helen, that's brilliant. It's not punishment, she said, sliding the pen into her fingers. It's opportunity, structured with interest. Dean gave a low whistle. I've written clauses about pets, gardens, even a rare parrot once. But this is legacy enforcement. Helen signed page 6 with a steady, deliberate hand, then the signature page, then the initials on the final copy. As she passed the documents back, Dean shook his head in admiration. You've redefined Christmas spirit. No, Helen said quietly. I've just stopped letting it be one-sided. He sat back, watching her carefully. Do you think she'll try to meet it? Helen looked out the frosted window. The clouds were low and soft, full of more snow. She's either going to become the person she's pretending to be, or she's going to walk away knowing it was never real. Dean tapped the folder shut. You just placed your legacy on layaway. Helen smirked. And interest compounds character. She stood, gloves in hand, coat folded neatly over her arm. Dean reached for the envelope with the final copies. Want me to courier it to Sam? Helen shook her head. I'll deliver it myself. 2 hours later, Sam stood in his driveway in thick boots and a down vest, shoveling what had become slush. He looked up as Helen pulled in, her car tires crunching over packed ice. She stepped out, holding an envelope marked with his name. He took it without asking. Is this the final version? Helen said. Sam turned it over in his gloved hands. Does she know? She will, Helen said. Eventually. He nodded, quiet. Helen looked at him. I left you more than you asked for. Sam's brow furrowed. I never asked for anything. That's why you're getting it, she said. Across town, Emily knelt by her fireplace, sorting through mail, invoices, and paperwork. Her fingers were red from cold. Todd had turned the heat down to save money. They hadn't said it aloud, but foreclosure was still breathing down their necks. She reached for a manila envelope that had no return address. Inside, a single-page clause. Legal font. Trust language. She read the first line, confused. Then her eyes widened as she reached the fourth. Her hands shook slightly. By the time she finished, she didn't know whether to cry or laugh, or call her mother and scream all over again. But she knew one thing. This wasn't over. The Walker Literacy Program had taken over the old library annex downtown, once a forgotten wing of yellowing books and broken lights. Now it buzzed every Saturday with volunteers, students, and the low hum of second chances. Emily Reynolds stood at the back of the main room, arms folded, watching a 6th-grade boy stumble through a paragraph aloud. His hands trembled. His voice cracked. She nodded softly when he finished. Nice job, Adam, she said. Take a breath and try that last sentence again. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. No heels. No statement necklace. Her jeans had paint flecks on them from repainting the hallway earlier that week. When she reached into her bag, she pulled out a pack of trail mix, not a $600 clutch. She hadn't meant to stay after the first month. It had been about checking the box, logging the hours, appeasing the claws. But slowly, without realizing it, something shifted. She'd stopped looking at the clock. She started learning names. She knew which kid had trouble with phonics, and which one pretended he didn't care so he could hide how badly he wanted to succeed. Her smile, when it came now, was quieter, but real. From the hallway outside, Helen stood behind the glass-paneled door, unnoticed. She didn't enter, just watched. A beat, then another. "Do you think she's changed?" Sam's voice came from behind her. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, watching too. Helen didn't answer right away. Inside the classroom, Emily crouched beside Adam, pointing to the word photograph and gently correcting his syllables. She didn't flinch when he got it wrong. She smiled when he got it right. "Maybe," Helen said at last. "Some lessons mature like debt. Slowly, painfully, but completely." Sam nodded once. "She looks different." "She is different," Helen said. "Not fixed, not finished, but finally facing something that isn't a mirror." They stood in companionable silence for a moment. A boy burst out of the classroom to use the bathroom, startling them both slightly before disappearing down the hall. Sam smirked. "You know she still thinks you're testing her." Helen didn't smile. "I am." He raised an eyebrow. "But not like she thinks," Helen said. "I'm not measuring time or paperwork. I'm watching to see if she still pretends she's owed something." Sam looked back through the glass. "And if she doesn't?" Helen's gaze didn't move. "Then we're even." Down the hall, Margie appeared, holding 2 lattes and wearing a scarf that could double as a blanket. "It smells like middle school in here," she muttered, handing one to Helen. And not in a nostalgic way. "Thank you," Helen said, taking the cup. Margie squinted toward the classroom. "So that's her? Our little Stickergate survivor?" "She's showing up," Helen said. "That's more than I thought I'd see a year ago." Margie sipped her drink. "She doesn't know you come here, does she?" "No." Margie gave her a sideways look. "And why not?" Helen took a long sip. "Because Grace should never ask for credit." Margie grinned. "Look at you, all poetic now that you've burned the kingdom down and planted a library in its ashes." Helen finally smiled, small, earned. Margie leaned against the wall. "And you?" Helen's eyes stayed on her daughter. "Debt-free," she said. "Finally." The cottage looked like something from a snow globe. Lights twinkled across the roofline in quiet, symmetrical rows. A wreath of cedar and pine cones hung on the front door. No glitter, no ribbons. Just real things. Inside, the living room was warm, smaller than the house on Briar Ridge had ever been, but filled with something more grounded. The fireplace crackled low. A simple tree stood near the window, its ornaments mismatched and meaningful. Sam's childhood macaroni star, a faded glass violin from Helen's college recital, and a paper snowflake that still had a bit of crayon along the edge. The gathering was small, intentional. Sam lounged in the armchair by the fire. Margie was curled on the couch, glass of red in hand, legs tucked under her like she owned the place. Helen sat nearest the tree, cup of cider between her palms, legs crossed at the ankle. Emily entered quietly through the front door. No fanfare, no faux joy, just a breath, a nod. She wore a forest green sweater and jeans. Her boots tracked a little snow onto the mat, and she didn't bother brushing it off. In her hands, a small, square box, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with string. Not showy, not defensive. Just enough. For you, she said, setting it gently beside Helen's cider. Merry Christmas, Mom. Helen looked up slowly. There was no flicker of surprise on her face, only pause. Caution, maybe, or reverence. She reached for the box, unwrapping it carefully. Inside, a wooden frame, and in it, a handwritten note. Charcoal ink on thick linen paper, no signature. Just 5 words. Paid in full, with thanks. Helen stared at it for a long moment. Her hand stilled. Her breath caught. Silence fell around the room like snow. Then her voice, soft and full. Now that's a gift, she said, thumb brushing the edge of the glass. I can't regift. Emily smiled, small, trembling, but real. Sam raised his cider. Well, damn, we finally made it. Margie raised her wine. To interest repaid? In respect. Everyone clinked glasses. Cider, wine, cocoa. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like a family gathering instead of a minefield. Helen didn't speak much for the next few minutes. She didn't need to. She just sat there, holding the frame like it anchored something in her that might have otherwise drifted. Later, when the fireplace burned low and the laughter softened into background warmth, Helen slipped into the kitchen for another cup of tea. Emily followed. They stood there in silence facing the sink, backs to the tree. Helen didn't turn. You know the clause still stands. I know, Emily said. I'm not here to cash it in. Helen set the kettle down. Then why now? Emily exhaled. Because I didn't want the next Christmas to start with debt. Helen nodded once, her back still to her. That's how you keep peace, Emily. Not by buying it. By honoring the cost of earning it. I'm trying, Emily said. I see that, Helen replied. And she did. Last Christmas she mocked my gift. This year she finally understood its worth.